fast, being that your relative, your little brother who you grew up with, knowing that you'll never see him again.
Mr. Martin had 9 entrance wounds to his body. There were 2 to the head and neck area, there were 4 in the midsection, and there were 3 in the lower extremities.
When you shoot someone that many times, this isn't a robbery gone bad. He was targeted.
The sad part is, even though the law acquitted him, in the streets, they don't want to hear any of that.
He would die over them, man. If they had beef, it was his beef.
I said, "Aren't you scared?" And he just said, "I'm not scared of nothing."
He kind of put 2 and 2 together. That was some type of payback.
May 31st, 2018. Just before dawn, police in Waterloo, Iowa, receive a call about an injured man near the 1200 block of Washington Street.
So the initial call came in that there was a black male in a pool of blood in the alley. One of the neighbors in the alley had called it in.
Responding officers quickly determined that the victim has already succumbed to his injuries. They search for evidence to explain his death.
Of particular interest here was the number of bullets, of shell casings. There were, I believe, 5 shell casings found on scene, 3 fired bullets.
They couldn't find any wallet, ID, so initially they had no idea who this black male in the alley that had been killed was. They did notice some tattoos on his arms, and one of our officers was good enough to run through our database the tattoos that he saw, and that tattoo ultimately identified him as Shavonda Martin.
Shavonda Chavez Martin was born on January 5, 1996, in Greenwood, Mississippi, to parents Diane Martin and little John Archer Chavez. Shavonda immediately won over his older half-brother, DeAndre.
I remember when he came home in his car seat, he was a smiling baby. He was quiet, like always sitting in his car seat smiling. He was a smiling person. I'm the oldest, and then second, the middle child is Cardarius, and the youngest was Shavonda.
DeAndre, he always been like the smart one, the focused one. Then you got me, I always was the class clown. Then you got Shavonda, he had his own type of personality. Funny, caring, had the biggest heart.
A lot of times, it was just us, kind of us against the world, you know. My mom raised us alone. Dad wasn't there. We lived with family members, been around cousins.
We grew up since we was kids. Like, when we stayed together at my mom's house, it used to be everybody. When we lived in Mississippi, it used to be everybody.
It was fun, rough moments, tough moments, sad moments. But I think that's what made us strong at the end of the day.
In the early 2000s, the extended family decided to move from Mississippi to Waterloo, Iowa.
My parents decided that they wanted something better in Mississippi. There's no money down there. It's like my dad got tired of working for bare minimum and he wanted more, so we moved up here.
The move from a predominantly black city with only 15,000 residents to a predominantly white city of 68,000 came with some culture shock. Waterloo didn't offer everything the family had hoped for.
Waterloo is on the list for the worst cities for Black Americans based on household income, based on home ownership versus renting, based on opportunities, whether it be in jobs or specifically related to pay. And I'm telling you, if you are familiar with this area and you drive through the neighborhoods of Waterloo, you can feel that.
Gunplay was, in our neighborhood, is very normal. Hearing shots all the time, police sirens and things like that.
We wasn't like allowed to like go around the block and because my mom's concerned about our safety and stuff, so really tough on us.
Thankfully, the Waterloo community had some strong youth outreach programs.
I had an opportunity to get involved with a soccer program that was beginning in one of the lowest economic schools, elementary schools in Waterloo. And at that, I met Cardarius, and I became his big brother with Big Brothers Big Sisters. Shavondas ended up being on our soccer team the next year.
For the two younger brothers, sports provided an escape and hope for the future.
Shavondas started picking up basketball after I started picking up basketball. He was actually good. Me and Shavondas' conversation was, hey, bro, what you doing? You need to sit there and think about what you're doing. You're really good at basketball, man. Take your talent seriously. Go to school. Like, we need to do something for mom, get her out of here. We need to continue with this sports, play basketball, whatever we can do to get us out of Iowa.
In high school, Cardarius defined himself as an athlete, but Shavondas gravitated toward other interests.
Shavondas, who was very athletic, but also just didn't have that drive. So a lot of times he would be at a game and you just want more from him. He just didn't want to try. And it was kind of that same thing with school. It was really hard to get him motivated. He just didn't have that motivation that the other two boys had. Maybe he saw that Dre was already the man of the house and Cardarius was kind of the athlete, and he said, what is it for me?
As a teenager, Shavondas started making friends on the streets and getting into trouble for the first time.
I think maybe hearing the gunshots in the neighborhood we lived in, sometimes you can just meet a friend or something, and then the adrenaline you're thinking, and it becomes that. So I think he was just struggling with wanting to be cool and be tough.
Shavondas was pretty smart. I mean, he wasn't stupid. He wasn't the person that just did whatever someone told him to. He was his own person.
He was definitely a little, hard-headed and whatever. When he jumped off the porch, he jumped. It wasn't no coming back from it.
In June 2016, Shavondas was arrested for possession of marijuana with intent to deliver.
Shavondas was probably already on the police radar when he got caught with narcotics and a scale and all of that, and then turned back around a month later, and then now is charged with being in the drive-by shooting.
I think it leads from the teenage years, from like fighting and having beef, and then it kind of like level up to go from fighting with hands to with guns.
Shavondas' attempts to fit in on the streets have dire consequences. When someone loses their life, and Shavondas is held responsible.
There were a couple of people shot, one of them being Octavius Brown, who ended up dying.
Shavondas got arrested for murder. I don't know to this day if he was one with a gun that struck the guy.
Shavondas spent 1.5 years in police custody. In early 2018, he went on trial for murder. A jury found him not guilty.
Ultimately, they didn't feel we had enough evidence to put a gun in Shavondas Martin's hands.
I know when he got out, the first thing he did was, he actually said that he was done with the streets. He just wanted to work and stay out of trouble.
He was back out. He was working at Tyson Chicken, and he was trying to pretty much reboot and change his life to try to get a low profile and just kind of live life on a better way and a straight and narrow path.
Instead of being in the mode he was before he went in, kind of being on guard when he got out, he's walking around like a changed man. And I think it might have just backfired, letting your guard down,
In the early morning hours on May 31st, 2018, 4 months after he was acquitted of murder and had turned his life around, Shavondas Martin has been murdered.
When I heard the name, it kind of hit close because I had arrested Shavondas Martin for murder roughly 2 years before this incident. During that previous investigation, we got to know each other quite well. My first thought when I learned it was Shavondas in the alley was, this isn't going to be easy. Unfortunately, he had made a lot of people angry, and we knew there was a lot of people that were after him. So it kind of created a wide pool of who might have done this. Made it a little more difficult that I learned his pockets have been gone through and possibly a phone taken. So initially we thought, was this possibly a robbery? So that opens up a whole bigger pool of potential people.
Investigators canvassed the neighborhood, searching for anyone who saw or heard the shooting.
A number of the witnesses described what they believed earlier in the morning, around 3:30 in the morning. They believed that there had been a party going on, and they thought they heard fireworks.
Others recognized the sounds as gunshots, but did not call police.
They don't want to call it in and be part of the crime because then their name gets out that they called it in. So we have a lot of people that won't call it in so they don't have to talk to the police.
Moving forward, homicide investigators have one thing to focus on: who killed Shavandez Martin?
Leaving the scene, we didn't have a lot to work with initially. In terms of the actual players, at that moment, we did not know.
In Waterloo, Iowa, police are investigating the shooting of 22-year-old Shavandez Martin. The victim and his family are well known in the community.
It was decided right away, let's go talk to Mom. We went to Diane's house, and I ultimately made the declaration that Shavandez had been murdered. She was obviously distraught and was having a tough time with answering questions, so she wanted her son DeAndre there.
I remember this like it was yesterday. I was in the car. It was me, my fiance, and my daughter. I get a call, and my mom said the police came to our door saying they think Shavandez is dead. I think somebody killed him. And then, honestly, I threw my phone. I hung it up, and I said it killed my brother.
Shavandez's older brother, Cardarius, is away at college when he receives the news via text message from a family friend.
So I called my brother, DeAndre. He answered and told me it was true. And my emotions felt like I couldn't breathe, felt like my heart just jumped out of my chest. You never think that would happen in your home so soon, so fast, being that your relative, your little brother who you grew up with, knowing that you never see him again.
I went to pick my mom up, and we went to where he was killed at. We got to see him just laying there lifeless, like an animal that's been ran over by a car. You can imagine how that can make me feel.
While the family and investigators are still at the scene, they receive information from a bystander who says she knew Shavandez.
We did talk to an ex-girlfriend right away, and the reason we did is because she arrived on the crime scene not knowing it was Shavandez, but eventually finding out, and made comments to an officer that she had just been with him that morning. We learned that at approximately 12:30, Shavandez did come by her house, and they talked for about an hour. After that, he called a friend, got picked up, and that was the last time she saw him. She had no real description of what kind of vehicle it was, just that it was a four-door vehicle, and Shavandez had gotten out of the back driver's seat. She didn't know who was driving and who else was in the vehicle. So now we had a timeline of that 1:30 a.m. where he left his ex-girlfriend's house to the 3:30 where the incident happened. So now we've narrowed that time of 2 hours that we need to figure out what happened in that time.
Investigators approach local businesses to see if anyone has surveillance footage of the area where Shavandez was found.
We did find some cameras, but a lot of times what I run across is a lot of people use dummy cameras. It's just a scare tactic. They're not actually hooked up or recording. So we didn't have anything of the immediate area that Shavandez was located at.
Later, the autopsy shows that more shots were fired than police had previously assumed.
Mr. Martin had 9 entrance wounds to his body. There were 2 to the head and neck area. There were 4 in the midsection, and there were 3 in the lower extremities.
There were 9mm bullets used, as well as .357 or .38 Special. .38 Special and .357 are a common revolver caliber, So we felt we were dealing with a revolver that wouldn't have left shell casings. So we believe there's two shooters because of the two guns.
The brutality of the murder also prompts investigators to theorize about motive.
This is a very personal incident. When you shoot someone that many times, this isn't a robbery gone bad. We're leaning more towards this is personal. He was targeted.
Police consider the recent acquittal of Shavondes Martin on murder charges as a potential motive for his murder.
Obviously, Atavius Brown's friends and family were not happy that he was acquitted on the shooting. His group had also created a lot of enemies, so there were always groups after, not necessarily him, but the people he hung out with.
And you kind of put two and two together. Everybody had common sense. That was some type of payback.
Investigating the murder of 22-year-old Shavondes Martin, police in Waterloo, Iowa, examine allegations that Shavondes was involved in another murder on July 17, 2016.
We had a drive-by shooting on Logan Avenue in Waterloo. We had a driver that was in his 30s, and then we had 3 other juveniles in the car doing the shootings. Through our investigation, we learned that multiple people fired shots at the house, eventually striking 2 and killing a 3rd.
A witness identified Shavondes as one of the 3 shooters. The murder victim was 21-year-old Atavius Brown.
Everything we learned, Atavius Brown was kind of just a wrong place, wrong time, innocent victim in this.
Atavius wasn't even part of anything to do with the streets. He was a guy that was just happened to be around. He had nothing to do with it. Nobody ever known him to do anything in the streets, guys. He just was a person that knew street guys.
Friends and family members of Shavondes Martin believe Shavondes was murdered because of his association with the death of Atavius Brown and his loyalty to the friends allegedly involved in that drive-by shooting.
We learned that Shavondes was very loyal to his friends, would do anything for them.
He loved his friend. He would die over them, man. It's nothing to really go. You could say to him about them. If they had beef, it was his beef. He was the one that was gonna step in for them.
And friends staying loyal and not snitching and all of these different codes that we have as young black men is the reason why Shavondes went down the hole that he went down.
Shavondes was acquitted of murder charges on February 9th, 2018. But the streets may not let go so easily.
The sad part is, even though the law acquitted him, in the streets, they don't want to hear any of that. If you're an alleged shooter of someone's family, we all know it's going to be payback. So he tried to lay low. He tried to work. He tried to keep his head down, stay low, don't go to any clubs like that. But in the back of his mind, I'm pretty sure he knew it was always somebody looking for him, always somebody that was still angry that he made it out.
My best hope for him when he got out was him and my mom just moved. I know Cardarius was living in Minnesota at the time, and then a lot of our families in Mississippi. I was praying that they just moved away. You had it like God gave you a second chance. Like a lot of people, especially young black men, don't get acquitted of murder. So I was like, y'all, you two should just move, but neither one of them wanted to move.
When that's all you know and that's all you ever been around, you haven't traveled much, you don't know what else to do, all your family is there. A lot of times people just feel like they'll just stick around and they'll be okay. They just hope for the best, even though they know they have to look over their shoulders. They just feel more comfortable being in a place that they've always known.
After months of trying to walk the straight and narrow, Shavondes seems to lose himself once again to the streets.
Once he got back around or back in his comfortable environment, he went back to his old ways.
He had gotten out of prison and we were hanging out, and I was just asking what he wanted for his life. It was the last time we hung out, actually. And I just remember him looking at me and he didn't know. And and it was silence. And I'll never forget that silence. And I just said, "Aren't you scared?" And he just said, "I'm not scared of nothing."
I hate that mentality. I hate I'm not scared of nothing. In all reality, you don't have to be afraid for something bad to happen to you. So you being tough sometimes is just escalating a situation for something bad to happen to you.
One day after Shavandez Martin was murdered, investigators are still trying to identify individuals with the motive and the opportunity to kill him.
June 1st, we really kind of hit a brick wall. We didn't have any leads on suspects, so we were just kind of trying to figure out what to do next. It was suggested maybe go talk to Mom again, see if there had been any information she had gathered from friends or family that could help us. It happened to be probably the biggest break that we got in the case.
On June 1st, 2018, detectives in Waterloo, Iowa, pay another visit to the mother of murder victim Shavandez Martin.
Diane wasn't home, but her son Cardarius was. While we were speaking to him, a car with 4 females pulled up, and the driver, later identified as Shavandez's cousin, Tatanisha Hunt, got out of the seat and claimed that she had just been at the bus station and Denasia Martin was trying to leave town.
Denasia is like a third, second cousin to me. She was not my cup of tea at all. She was more so into the streets a lot.
Waterloo being a very tight-knit town, I'm very aware of who Denasia was. So I knew who they were talking about, but I didn't know where she fit into this case.
According to Tatanisha, friends saw Denasia sitting at the bus stop with a man they believed was Raymond Burden Jr. They know Burden as the stepbrother of Octavius Brown, the man Shavandez was accused of murdering.
There had been a lot of hate between Raymond and Shavandez. Shavandez had gotten off of murdering Raymond's brother, Octavius. There was always that hostility towards them. So when we get that name, the timeline starts to make sense.
Tatanisha is suspicious of Denasia and Raymond being together and at the bus stop so soon after the murder. So she goes to confront them.
I speed down there. Me and all my friends, we all speed down there. We like 2 cars deep. They see me pull up and they hurry up and drove off. I chased them down. I was like following them. Like they was speeding, I was speeding. I chased them all the way out to like Cedar Falls.
However, at a certain point, she saw a police cruiser and slowed down. After that, she lost sight of the vehicle.
I went back to my auntie house. We was out there, the detective come, and I tell them, I'm angry. Like, they was just trying to get to the bus station, get away on the bus.
But at that point, we had no idea what part Denasia played in this, or why she was fleeing town, or why Tatanisha was even looking for her.
According to Tatanisha, a family friend named Muff says he saw Denasia and Shavandez together on the day of the murder.
We learned that Denasia had picked up Shavandez that morning of May 31st and was likely the last person now to see him alive.
Muff was in the car with Denasia when she picked up Shavandez, just hours before he was found dead.
Muff, I actually knew who that was just from previous interactions. I knew where he lived. He was willing to let us in and talk. We learned that, in fact, he was in the car with Denasia when they picked Shavandez up that morning. He put it roughly around 2 o'clock. We asked what happened after they picked Shavandez up. So he said that at the time, he asked Denasia to drop him off at a friend's house near a Walgreens just up the road from where they had picked him up. So then Denasia's alone with Shavandez in her car, being the last person with him. We need to find Denasia.
Detectives go to the Waterloo bus station and request surveillance footage from earlier that day.
Denasia Martin was clearly in a disguise of some sort. Her hair was different. I believe she had sunglasses on. She was attempting to get a bus ticket, I believe to Chicago, but her bag was too big.
Through the investigation, we also learned that Denasia had an apartment in the alley right next to where Shavonda was found. We started doing backgrounds on her, figuring out who she hung out with.
Police records prove that Denasia has a long history with Raymond Burton Jr., the stepbrother of Octavius Brown, who Shavonda was acquitted of murdering.
Raymond and Denasia had an on-again, off-again relationship. It was kind of well known through the police department. They had been arrested several times together. They had caused quite the havoc at juvenile detention facilities.
Now, investigators have 2 prime suspects. And they're not the only ones looking for Raymond and Denasia.
They never went back to the bus station because I was watching. I figured they probably drove out of town because what somebody had told me, they said she was going to Mississippi.
While trying to track down Denasia and Raymond, detectives receive a surprising call.
It did hit kind of stale for about a day, and then we received a phone call from Denasia. She said she was on a bus in, I think, Michigan at the time, but she was on her way to see her dad in Norfolk. At that time, Denasia denied being involved in Shavonda's death, but admitted that she had picked up Shavonda from the apartment complex and was the last person to see him alive. She said she dropped him off in a neighborhood and then went to her boyfriend's house. At the time, I wasn't going to be able to find her boyfriend because he had multiple warrants and didn't want to be found by us. So it left an open alibi there as far as we couldn't prove that, we couldn't disprove it. But the story just didn't seem right to me.
Investigators urged Denasia to come to the police station and tell them everything she knows. But Denasia says she's afraid.
She knew her cousin had died. She also had been receiving some threats as far as being the last person to see her cousin alive. She knew people were looking for her. She was adamant that there was no way she was coming back to Waterloo.
Just days after the murder of Shavonda Martin, police in Waterloo, Iowa have received a call from the victim's cousin, Denasia Martin, that she is willing to cooperate with the investigation, but only from a safe distance.
She was in fear. Everyone was accusing her of killing her cousin, and she just did not feel safe. So it was decided that me and another detective were going to go to Virginia and talk to her in person. When we met at her aunt's house, she gave a better detailed statement about what had happened.
There wasn't a great deal of consistency initially with Miss Martin, but we were able to piece together that she had been with a group of individuals on the 30th, including Raymond Burton. They had been driving around.
She talked about their timeline, gave us places that they stopped. All these things that she was telling us was just information that we needed to follow up on. It was potential video, it was potential records, purchases at gas stations.
Law enforcement was able to go back, track that story, and confirm much of what she had told law enforcement. We obtained video footage from a number of locations in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Denasia tells police that toward the end of the night, she and her friend Muff went to pick up Shavonda from his girlfriend's house. Later, she says they were attacked.
They pulled up to an intersection. Multiple people got out of a car in front of them and pulled Shavonda out of the car at gunpoint. She was able to identify 2 of the people that were in that car, Raymond Burton and another male. She stated that they ultimately pulled him into a car, drove off, and that was the last time she ever saw her cousin.
After Denasia finishes telling her side of the story, police notice one contradiction. She said Muff was in the car with her when Chavandez was abducted. But that's not the story Muff told police. Investigators decide to re-interview him.
He stated that he was afraid of the people that did this, and that's why he never wanted to tell us what happened. But he finally broke down and agreed to tell us what happened.
It was just her and him in a car. They went and picked up Chavandez. We learned from him that Denasia starts acting very bizarre at that point. She's driving all over the place, slamming on the brakes, says she has to use the restroom, which was odd to him because there had been a gas station nearby. They then go up to Denasia's residence on the same alley where Mr. Martin was found.
She left the two of them in her car. During the statement, Muff says Chavandez is very paranoid, doesn't like it. Even makes the comment that, I don't like being out here, I don't have a gun, I have no protection.
Eventually, Muff says he saw a gun come through the window next to Chavandez's head.
He stated that a male with a gun told Chavandez, I got you. At that point, when the gunman started talking, Muff said he knew who it was. He knew it was Raymond Burton.
Raymond Burton ordered Chavandez to get out of the car and walk into the alley behind Denasia's apartment building.
Muff stated that as they're walking back to the alley, another person came from behind the apartment building, joined them, and that's the last time he saw Chavandez.
One of the things that sticks out to me, Mr. Martin knew he was going to be murdered. I don't care who you are, and I don't care what you're accused of been doing. Nobody should have to be put in a position where they are walking to their execution.
Muff tells police he fled the scene before the shooting began.
He was afraid, so he pulled away in the vehicle, but as he was pulling away, he did hear the gunshots.
To build a solid murder case against Raymond Burton Jr., authorities know they'll need more than Muff's testimony. They keep searching for evidence that connects the alleged shooter to the victim.
At the time, I knew what Raymond's Facebook profile was. My first thing was see if there was any communication between them. So on Chavandez's Facebook results, we ended up finding a pretty significant conversation.
Chavandez has social media, so people can still contact you. They can still say things that it's gonna rile you up and make you feel away. So when he started getting contacted from Raymond, his first instinct was to lash back out, to say whatever he gotta say, because he's not gonna let anybody chump him off or punk him out. And that's where the problem pretty much started to escalate from there.
In that conversation, there is some back and forth between Raymond and Chavandez. At one point, Chavandez insults Octavius Brown, and Raymond takes offense to that and escalates the conversation, threatening Chavandez. Chavandez tells him that if he doesn't be careful, he's going to end up in a grave next to his brother, to which Raymond responds, I bet you see him before I do.
Without a doubt, a threat that was made. And this is just in the hours just prior to the shooting death of Chavandez Martin.
At that point, Raymond was actually wanted on a separate crime. We felt confident if we can try to get him in jail, maybe we can build a case and ultimately charge him with murder.
In the fall of 2018, authorities are searching for Raymond Burton Jr., the main suspect in the shooting death of Shavondez Martin.
Our detectives were able to actually locate him in Texas, get him arrested, and brought back to Waterloo.
Raymond Burton was placed under arrest for an unrelated intimidation with a dangerous weapon prior to his arrest for the murder of Shavondez Martin.
Soon after, authorities also arrest his accomplice, Denasia Martin, who authorities believe lured her own cousin to his death.
There was no denying that she knew that this was payback. This was a setup.
We sent the U.S. Marshals after her in Norfolk, Virginia, where she was ultimately arrested. We had her transported back to Black Hawk eventually, where she agreed to cooperate with the case.
Denasia Martin pled to conspiracy to commit a forcible felony and was sentenced to prison for an indeterminate sentence not to exceed 10 years.
In April 2021, Raymond Burton Jr. went on trial for murder.
We was sitting in the same room as his family, so emotions is flaring. Both families in the same room, so a lot of tension.
I was real angry. I kept walking out the room. Like, I couldn't hear it all. It was just making me so mad.
Raymond ultimately didn't take the stand. He refused to talk to us.
Raymond was very cool and calm throughout the trial, up until the time of the verdict.
On May 4th, a jury decides his fate.
Ultimately, they found Raymond Burton guilty of murder in the first degree. And in Iowa, any murder in the first verdict is a mandatory life in prison without the chance of parole.
It was a relief, but after they said guilty, I told my family, we all got up and hurried up and left, because let's not give this chance to boil.
Remind you, this is a small city, small neighborhood where nobody really gets out of it anyway. So after the verdict, after all of this, they're still gonna see each other. And they're gonna see each other every day at grocery stores, picking up their kids from school, just anywhere. And this is something they're gonna have to live with.
The mysterious second shooter has never been identified or brought to justice. And tragically, Shavondez's mother did not live to see Raymond Burton Jr. convicted.
It's months apart, still grieving from our brother. We had to grieve again from our mother.
In September 2018, Diane Martin died in her own home, the apparent victim of a stray bullet in a drive-by shooting.
I seen my mom laying on the floor right there in the kitchen with blood everywhere. So I looked to see if she was okay. I seen her eyes red. And I seen blood like on the stove everywhere from her back of her head. And I seen it and I ran out the house, always to the end of the church by my house. I sat there in front of the door and cried, and then go back to the house ever since.
Her murder is still under investigation. We have not made an arrest in it. We don't believe at this time she was the intended target. We believe she was an innocent victim in gunplay.
My auntie was an innocent lady, and she didn't deserve to die at all with no bullet. But, you know, if justice don't come, God got him at the end. Your karma gonna come around.
In cases like this, even though it's been years and years already passed down, there's also beefs that get passed down as well. So it's probably still gunplay and other beefs that stem from that's still going on to this day. And there's probably some people that's involved in this beef that doesn't even realize where it really stemmed from. My message to all unks, all big homies, all fathers, just try to lead by example.
If you care about yourself enough, you'll know how valuable you is. See, me being spiritual and learning how valuable I am, I knew that with me being gone, that my family, my kids and wife, fiance would fall apart and they wouldn't be safe. So I knew how valuable I was. I knew that I was valuable to my family and my friends and to the world more being alive than in jail. That's what kept me straight-headed.
On the surface, Colonel Russell Williams appeared to represent everything people expected from a respected military officer. He was disciplined, intelligent, successful, and trusted. He had built a career inside the Canadian military through years of dedication and achievement. He was the kind of person many believed they could rely on, a commander, a leader, a man who had earned responsibility. But behind that carefully constructed image was a secret world that remained hidden for years. A world of obsession, a world of stolen objects, a world of increasingly disturbing behavior that would eventually shock an entire country. The story of Russell Williams is not only about the crimes he committed, it is also about the terrifying contrast between appearance and reality. How could someone who held a position of authority, someone who was trusted by colleagues and respected by the public, secretly live a life so different from the image he presented? For years, the answer remained hidden. The man people saw was Colonel Russell Williams, a senior officer in the Royal Canadian Air Force. He had achieved a level of success that many people spend their entire lives trying to reach. He was educated, organized, and known as someone who understood responsibility. His career placed him among people who depended on his judgment and leadership. He had flown military aircraft. He had held important positions. He had been involved in operations that required precision and trust. To those around him, he seemed controlled, professional, reliable. But behind closed doors, a completely different pattern was developing. Long before the world knew his name, Russell Williams began committing crimes that appeared disconnected from the person everyone thought they knew. These crimes started with secret burglaries, carefully planned invasions into the private spaces of strangers. At first glance, these incidents might have appeared like ordinary thefts, but investigators would later discover that they were something much more disturbing. Williams was not simply taking valuable objects. He was entering people's homes, their private spaces, the places where they should have felt safest. He watched, he planned, he waited, and each crime revealed more about a hidden side of his personality. The burglaries began in Ontario, where residents reported strange incidents involving missing personal items. Some victims returned home to find that someone had entered their house while they were away. There were no obvious signs of violence, no dramatic destruction. The intruder had moved quietly, leaving behind confusion and fear. For many victims, the most unsettling part was not just what had been taken. It was the feeling that someone had crossed into their personal world. A stranger had been inside their home, a place filled with memories, photographs, and personal belongings, a place where people expected privacy. At the time, no one imagined that the person responsible was someone who appeared so far removed from criminal behavior. Russell Williams did not fit the image many people had of a criminal. He did not look like a dangerous person. He did not live as an obvious outsider. Instead, he blended into society. He wore a uniform. He followed military procedures. He attended professional events. He interacted with colleagues who respected him. This contrast became one of the most disturbing elements of the case. The crimes were not committed by someone hiding from society. They were committed by someone standing in the middle of it. As the burglaries continued, investigators began noticing patterns. The incidents were not random. They showed planning and a disturbing level of control. The person responsible appeared to understand how to avoid attention. There was patience. There was calculation. There was an awareness of when people would be away and how to move without being detected. This was not a series of impulsive decisions. It was a pattern, a hidden behavior that continued because the person behind it believed he could remain invisible. For years, Russell Williams maintained two separate identities. One was the public identity, the respected military commander, the professional, the man trusted with important duties. The other was the secret identity, the person entering homes in the darkness, the person collecting stolen personal items, the person engaging in behavior that became increasingly dangerous. The existence of these two lives is what made the case so difficult for many people to understand. How could someone appear completely normal while hiding something so disturbing? This question would become central after Williams was finally exposed. But before that happened, the crimes continued. The burglaries represented an escalation. They were not only illegal acts, they were signs of a deeper problem that was growing over time. Criminal behavior often develops through stages, and in Williams' case, investigators later saw progression from property crimes into far more serious offenses. The early burglaries were not the end. They were the beginning of a much darker path. By 2010, the investigation into these crimes would take a dramatic turn. A separate case involving the murder of two women would eventually connect investigators to Williams. The discovery would reveal that the person they were looking for was not a stranger hiding in the shadows. It was a man who had spent years building a reputation of honor and service. The revelation created shock across Canada. Many people struggled to accept that a senior military officer could be responsible for such crimes. The uniform, the title, and the public respect all seemed impossible to reconcile with the evidence. But the investigation would uncover a frightening reality. A person's public image does not always reveal the truth about what happens in private. The story of Russell Williams became a warning about deception, hidden behavior, and the dangers of assuming that someone's appearance tells the whole story. Behind every professional achievement, behind every photograph, behind every carefully controlled public moment, there can exist parts of a person that remain completely unknown. The case would eventually become one of the most infamous criminal investigations in Canadian history, not only because of the crimes themselves, but because of the person who committed them. A man who had spent years gaining trust, a man who appeared to represent discipline and responsibility, a man whose secret actions would destroy the image he had created. The story of Colonel Russell Williams begins with a simple question. How well do we really know the people around us? Because sometimes the most frightening secrets are not hidden in the darkness. Sometimes they are hidden behind a familiar face. To understand how the story of Colonel Russell Williams became one of Canada's most shocking criminal cases, it is necessary to understand the world he came from. The military is built on trust. Every soldier, every officer, every commander depends on the person beside them. In that environment, reputation matters, discipline matters. A person's ability to follow rules, make decisions under pressure, and protect others becomes part of their identity. Russell Williams understood that world completely. For decades, he built a career based on the qualities that people associate with leadership. He appeared organized, intelligent, and dependable. He moved through the military system successfully, gaining promotions and responsibilities that placed him in positions of authority. He was not an unknown figure. He was someone people recognized, someone people respected, someone many believed represented the best qualities of military service. His professional life created a powerful image, the image of a man who had control over every detail, the image of a man who understood responsibility, the image of a man who could be trusted. And that image made the truth behind his private behavior even more difficult for people to accept. The communities where Williams lived were not places where people expected a major criminal investigation to unfold. They were ordinary neighborhoods filled with families, workers, and people living everyday lives. Homes lined quiet streets. Neighbors greeted each other. People went to work, returned home, and followed familiar routines. For many residents, their homes represented safety, a place where they could close the door and feel protected from the outside world. But someone was watching those routines. Someone was studying those patterns. Someone was learning when people were away. The burglaries committed by Williams were disturbing because they violated that sense of security. A home is not just a physical structure. It is a personal space. Inside are memories, private belongings, and pieces of a person's life. When someone enters without permission, the damage is not only about what is missing. It is about the feeling that a private world has been invaded. Victims often describe this type of crime as deeply unsettling because even after the intruder leaves, the fear remains. The house looks the same. The furniture is still there. The walls are still standing. But something has changed. The feeling of safety is different. During the years when Williams was committing burglaries, few people could have imagined that the person responsible was someone with such a public reputation. The idea that a senior military officer could secretly break into homes seemed impossible. That was part of what allowed the behavior to continue. People often imagine criminals as obvious outsiders. They imagine someone who looks suspicious, someone who behaves differently, someone who does not belong. But cases like Williams challenge that assumption. A person can appear successful. A person can have friends, colleagues, and achievements. A person can maintain a respected public identity while hiding disturbing actions. This contradiction became one of the central themes of the investigation, the difference between who Russell Williams appeared to be and who he was privately. As the burglaries continued, investigators began to see signs that the crimes were not random. The person responsible seemed careful. There was planning involved. There was a method. The crimes reflected someone who was not simply acting in a moment of chaos. Instead, they showed preparation and a desire to avoid detection. This pattern made the investigation more complex. Police were not looking for someone who made a single mistake. They were looking for someone who had successfully hidden a repeated behavior. The challenge was identifying the person behind the crimes. There were many possibilities, many suspects, many unanswered questions, but the truth was closer than anyone expected. Williams' military background gave him certain advantages. He understood procedures. He understood observation. He understood how to remain calm under pressure. These qualities, which had helped him succeed professionally, also made his crimes harder to understand. The same person who could handle responsibility in public was secretly engaging in actions that violated the safety and trust of others. This contrast created a disturbing question. Was the person people admired ever truly known? Or was the public version only one part of a much more complicated reality? The answer would become clearer as investigators uncovered more evidence. But before the investigation reached its final stage, Williams continued living his double life. He attended military events. He carried out his duties. He interacted with colleagues. He maintained the appearance of normality. To the outside world, nothing seemed unusual. That is what made the case so unsettling. There was no obvious warning sign that everyone had ignored. There was no single moment where people realized something was wrong. Instead, the truth remained hidden behind years of normal interactions. The story of Russell Williams also raised broader questions about human behavior. How can someone separate their public and private worlds so completely? How can someone maintain relationships, responsibilities, and a professional reputation while hiding criminal actions? Psychologists and investigators often study these questions because cases involving deceptive offenders reveal how complicated human behavior can be. People are not always easy to understand from the outside. A person's career, appearance, or social position does not automatically reveal their character. The case became a reminder that trust is important, but awareness is also important. As the investigation moved forward, the peaceful image of the communities involved would slowly begin to change. The quiet streets where people once felt comfortable became connected to a disturbing mystery. Residents began asking questions. They wondered who had entered those homes. They wondered how long it had been happening. They wondered how someone could commit such acts while appearing completely ordinary. And eventually, the answers would lead investigators toward a person almost no one suspected. A decorated officer. A respected commander. a man whose uniform represented honor. But behind that uniform was a secret that would eventually come to light. The story of Colonel Russell Williams was not only about crime. It was about deception, about hidden behavior, about the frightening possibility that the person who seems the most trustworthy may still have secrets no one sees. And as investigators moved closer to uncovering the truth, the carefully built image of Russell Williams began to collapse. When a criminal case becomes a national headline, the attention often moves quickly toward the person accused. People ask questions about the suspect. They analyze the investigation. They follow every new development. But behind every crime, there are people whose lives were directly changed by what happened. The victims. The people who experience the fear, confusion, and violation left behind by someone else's actions. In the case of Colonel Russell Williams, the burglaries were not simply about stolen objects. They were about the invasion of private lives. They were about the moment when ordinary people realized that someone had entered a place where they should have felt completely safe. Their homes. For the victims, the experience was deeply personal. A house is more than walls and furniture. It is where people keep their memories, where they relax after long days, where they store items that may have emotional value far beyond their price. When an intruder enters that space, the impact can remain long after the physical evidence disappears. The victims of Williams' burglaries often discover the crimes only after returning home. At first, there may have been confusion, a missing item, something slightly out of place, a feeling that something was wrong. Then came the realization: someone had been inside. Someone had crossed a boundary. Someone had been close to their private lives without their knowledge. That feeling created a unique kind of fear. Unlike a robbery that happens in public, a burglary creates uncertainty. The victim begins wondering, when did it happen? How long was the person inside? Was I ever close to the person responsible? Was I being watched before it happened? Those questions can stay with people for years. The emotional damage is often much greater than the financial loss. The stolen items themselves were not always the most important part. The real loss was the feeling of security, the belief that home was the one place where danger could not enter. Williams' crimes were especially disturbing because of the nature of what he targeted. He was not simply taking expensive electronics or valuable objects. His actions showed an interest in personal belongings connected to the private lives of women that made the crimes feel even more invasive. The items represented something personal, something intimate, something that belonged only to the people who owned them. For the victims, the experience was not just about theft. It was about being personally violated by someone they did not know. The psychological impact of such crimes can be difficult to explain. Many people imagine burglary as a simple property crime, but victims often describe something deeper. They feel exposed. They feel powerless. They feel as though their personal space has been taken away from them. Even after locks are changed and repairs are made, the memory remains. The knowledge that a stranger was inside their home can alter the way a person sees their own surroundings. A bedroom that once represented comfort can become a place connected to fear. A quiet neighborhood can suddenly feel different. A normal routine can be replaced by suspicion. This was the reality faced by the victims connected to Williams' crimes. They were ordinary people living ordinary lives. They were not looking for danger. They were not expecting to become part of a major criminal investigation. Their lives changed because someone else chose to cross a line. That is often one of the hardest things for victims to accept. They did nothing wrong. They were simply living their lives. Yet they became part of someone else's hidden obsession. As investigators later uncovered the full extent of Williams' behavior, the victims' experiences became even more significant. The burglaries were no longer isolated incidents. They were pieces of a larger pattern. Each victim represented another moment when Williams entered someone's world without permission. Another person whose sense of safety was damaged. Another reminder that behind criminal statistics are real human experiences. The victims also became important in understanding how the investigation developed. Every report mattered. Every detail mattered. A missing object, a description of what was different, a timeline, a pattern. Investigators depended on these small pieces of information to understand what they were dealing with. Criminal investigations are often built from fragments. A single incident may seem unclear, but when combined with other incidents, a larger picture begins to appear. That picture eventually revealed a repeated behavior, a pattern of preparation, a pattern of secrecy, a pattern that had existed beneath the surface for years. The victims' stories also highlight a painful reality about trust. Many people believe that serious criminals are easy to recognize. They imagine someone who looks dangerous, someone who behaves strangely, someone who immediately creates suspicion. But Williams did not fit that image. He was someone who appeared successful, someone with a respected position, someone who moved through society without attracting obvious suspicion. This made the victims' experiences even more difficult to process. The person responsible was not someone they expected. The case became a reminder that appearances can be misleading. A person's career, reputation, or social status does not tell the complete story of who they are. For the victims, however, the focus was not on the mystery of Williams' double life. Their focus was much more personal. They had experienced something frightening. They had lost a sense of control, and they had to rebuild their feeling of safety. Recovery after such an experience is different for every person. Some people become more cautious. Some change their routines. Some struggle with anxiety. Others try to move forward while carrying the memory quietly. But all victims share something important. Their lives were changed by a decision they did not make. The actions of one person affected many others. That is one of the most important lessons from the Russell Williams case. The damage caused by crime does not stop at the moment the crime happens. It continues through the lives of those left behind. The victims remind us that true crime stories are not only about criminals and investigations. They are about people. People who were living normal lives. People who deserve to feel safe. People who suddenly found themselves facing fear inside their own homes. And while history remembers the name Russell Williams because of his crimes, it is important to remember the people who experienced those crimes. Because every investigation begins with a victim. Every case represents a real person. And every story of crime should always return to the same question. Who was affected? Who was hurt? And how do we make sure their experiences are never forgotten? For years, Russell Williams lived two separate lives. To the outside world, he was a successful military officer. He wore the uniform. He followed commands. He gave orders. He represented discipline and responsibility. But away from the public eye, a completely different story was unfolding. The burglaries were not random acts. They were not moments of careless decision. They were part of a pattern that slowly became more disturbing over time. At first, the crimes appeared limited to illegal entry and theft. A person breaking into homes. A person taking personal belongings. A person leaving behind confusion and fear. But as investigators would later discover, the behavior was not staying the same. It was changing. It was becoming more serious. And with each step, the hidden side of Russell Williams became harder to ignore. The beginning of the escalation was difficult to detect because the crimes were committed carefully. Williams understood how to avoid attention. He was patient. He was organized. He studied situations before acting. This was not someone acting without thought. The planning itself became one of the most disturbing parts of the case. Many criminals make mistakes because of emotion, panic, or poor decisions. But Williams appeared to maintain control. He created opportunities. He waited. He avoided immediate consequences. And because of that, the behavior continued. The most frightening aspect was the contrast between his public and private worlds. During the day, he could attend meetings, communicate with colleagues, and perform his duties as a commander. People around him saw professionalism. They saw confidence. They saw someone who appeared completely in control. No one looking at that image would have immediately connected him to a series of secret crimes. This is what made the case so shocking later. The person investigators were searching for was not hidden in the way people expected. He was not living on the edge of society. He was not someone everyone avoided. He was a respected member of the community. As the crimes developed, the investigation became more complicated. Police were trying to understand the behavior of someone who was not leaving behind an obvious identity. There was no simple explanation, no immediate suspect, no clear connection between the criminal actions and the man who would eventually be identified. The victims were experiencing the consequences, but the person responsible remained invisible. Meanwhile, Williams continued maintaining his carefully built image. He continued his military career. He continued interacting with others. He continued living a life that appeared normal. This ability to separate his actions from his public identity became one of the most unsettling elements of the entire case. It raised questions that many people struggled to answer. How could someone behave one way in public and another way in private? How could someone maintain relationships while hiding actions that would eventually destroy everything around him? The answer would not be simple. Human behavior is complicated. People can hide parts of themselves. They can create images that do not reflect their entire reality. And sometimes, the people around them only discover the truth after serious damage has already occurred. As time passed, Williams' behavior moved beyond simple burglary. The crimes revealed a deeper level of obsession. They were no longer only about entering homes. They were about control, about crossing boundaries, about violating the privacy of others. This progression is one reason the case became so widely studied. Investigators and experts often examine how certain criminal behaviors develop over time. In many cases, there is a pattern of escalation. Small violations become larger ones. Hidden actions become more extreme. A person who begins by crossing one boundary may eventually cross another. The early burglaries were important because they showed the beginning of that progression. They were warning signs of something much more dangerous. The turning point came when authorities began connecting Williams to far more serious crimes. The investigation shifted from property crimes to a case involving violence and murder. Suddenly, the question was no longer only, who has been entering homes? The question became, who is capable of something far worse? The discovery shocked investigators because the evidence pointed towards someone who had previously seemed almost impossible to suspect. Russell Williams, a colonel, a military leader, a man with a respected career. The investigation revealed that the same person connected to the burglaries was also connected to crimes that had devastating consequences. The public reaction was immediate. People were stunned. Many struggled to understand how someone could carry such a respected identity while hiding such a disturbing reality. The uniform became a symbol of the contradiction. To many people, a military uniform represented honor, service, duty, trust. But in this case, the person wearing that uniform had betrayed those very ideas. The revelation changed everything. The investigation that had once focused on unknown crimes became a national story. People wanted answers. They wanted to know how long the behavior had been happening. They wanted to know whether warning signs had been missed. They wanted to understand how someone could hide so much. For the victims and their families, however, the most important issue was not the mystery surrounding Williams. It was the impact of what he had done, the fear, the loss, the pain. The lives changed forever. As more details emerged, the image of Russell Williams that people knew began to collapse. The successful officer, the respected commander, the trusted professional, all of these identities existed, but they were only part of the story. The investigation revealed another side, a side that had remained hidden for years. The case became a powerful reminder that people cannot always be understood from appearances alone. A person can have achievements. A person can receive praise. A person can hold positions of responsibility and still hide actions that are completely opposite to the image they present. The The crimes of Russell Williams were not shocking only because of what happened. They were shocking because of who was responsible. A man who seemed to represent order had secretly created chaos in the lives of others. A man trusted with protecting people had violated their sense of security. And as investigators continued uncovering the truth, Canada began to face one of the most disturbing criminal revelations in its modern history. The hidden life of Colonel Russell Williams was finally coming into the light. And once the truth emerged, there was no way to return to the image people had believed for so long. The investigation into Russell Williams did not begin with a dramatic revelation. It began with questions, small details, pieces of information that seemed separate at first, but slowly started forming a much larger picture. For investigators, the challenge was understanding that the person behind the crimes had spent years creating distance between himself and suspicion. The burglaries had created fear among victims. They had created uncertainty in communities. But the identity of the person responsible remained hidden. At the beginning, investigators were dealing with a difficult situation. They knew someone was entering homes. They knew the crimes showed planning. They knew the offender was careful. But they did not yet know who they were looking for. The person they needed to find was not leaving obvious signs. There was no clear trail leading directly to a suspect. Instead, investigators had to examine patterns. They had to compare incidents. They had to look beyond individual crimes and understand the behavior behind them. Every detail mattered. The timing of the burglaries, the locations, the items taken, the methods used. Each piece of information became part of a larger puzzle. Criminal investigations often depend on patience. A single clue may appear meaningless, but when combined with other evidence, it can reveal something much bigger. That was what began happening in the Williams case. The more investigators examined the incidents, the more they recognized similarities. The crimes did not feel random. They appeared connected. There was a consistent approach, a repeated pattern. Someone was not simply acting without thought. Someone was controlling the situation. At the same time, another investigation involving violence was unfolding. The connection between the burglaries and the more serious crimes would eventually become the turning point. For investigators, this changed the entire direction of the case. They were no longer looking only at property crimes. They were looking at something much more serious. A person capable of entering someone's home without permission was now suspected of crimes with far greater consequences. The pressure increased. The need for answers became urgent. As investigators looked deeper, Russell Williams came into focus. The discovery shocked many people involved because he did not match the image they expected. He was not an unknown criminal. He was not someone living outside society. He was a person with a respected position, a person whose background suggested responsibility and discipline. That contrast made the investigation even more complicated. Police were not only trying to prove what had happened, they were also trying to understand how such behavior could exist alongside such a carefully maintained public identity. Williams had spent years building trust. He had created a reputation. He had become someone people believed they understood. But the evidence suggested that there was another side of him that had remained hidden. The investigation began to reveal the difference between the person people knew and the person responsible for the crimes. This was one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. The idea that danger does not always look dangerous. Sometimes it appears ordinary. Sometimes it appears successful. Sometimes it appears trustworthy. The investigators now faced the task of uncovering the truth behind that appearance. As evidence accumulated, the picture became clearer. The burglaries were not isolated events. They were part of a broader pattern of behavior. The same attention to detail that had helped William succeed professionally appeared in the way he committed crimes. He was organized. He was methodical. He understood how to avoid detection. But every crime leaves traces. Sometimes those traces are physical. Sometimes they are behavioral. Sometimes they're found in patterns that only become visible after careful examination. In this case, the pattern eventually became impossible to ignore. The investigation also revealed the importance of technology and modern forensic methods. Information that once might have remained hidden could now be analyzed in new ways. Digital evidence, records, and investigative techniques help connect pieces that previously seemed unrelated. But technology alone does not solve cases. Investigators still need judgment. They need experience. They need the ability to recognize when separate details form a larger story. That process takes time. It requires looking beyond what is obvious. And in the Russell Williams investigation, that process uncovered a reality far more disturbing than many people expected. The public reaction was immediate once the truth began emerging. Many people in Canada struggled to understand what they were hearing. A senior military officer was connected to serious criminal activity. The same person who had been trusted with responsibility had been living a hidden life. For many, the question became, how could this happen without anyone knowing? It was a question that went beyond one individual. It became a question about human behavior, trust, and the difficulty of recognizing hidden problems. Because Williams did not appear suspicious to many people around him. He interacted normally. He performed his professional duties. He maintained relationships. He blended into everyday life. That was what made the discovery so unsettling. The investigation showed that a person can present one version of themselves to the world while hiding another. As the case developed, investigators continued gathering evidence and preparing for the next stage. The focus was no longer simply discovering who was responsible. The focus became proving the truth. Every piece of evidence mattered. Every connection mattered. The years of hidden behavior were finally being examined. The carefully constructed image was beginning to break apart. For the victims, the investigation represented something important. A chance for answers. A chance for accountability. A chance to understand how someone had entered their lives without their permission. For investigators, it represented the difficult process of uncovering a truth that had been hidden for years. And for the public, it became a powerful reminder that appearances can be misleading. The story of Russell Williams was no longer just about burglaries. It was about deception on a much larger scale. It was about the discovery of a hidden identity, a hidden pattern, a hidden reality that had existed beneath the surface for years. The investigation had finally reached the moment where the truth could no longer remain buried. The man behind the crimes had been identified, and the next question was the one everyone wanted answered. What would happen when Colonel Russell Williams was finally forced to face the consequences of what he had done? For investigators, one of the most difficult moments in any criminal case is the transition from suspicion to certainty. A person may appear connected. Evidence may suggest involvement. Patterns may begin to form. But before an accusation can become a conviction, investigators must build a case strong enough to explain exactly what happened. In the case of Russell Williams, that process revealed one of the most shocking contradictions in Canadian criminal history. The suspect was not someone hiding from society. He was someone standing in the middle of it. A respected officer, a commander, a person who had spent years creating an image of professionalism and reliability. But behind that image was a hidden pattern of behavior that investigators were now uncovering piece by piece. As the investigation moved forward, the focus on Williams became stronger. The evidence connected him to the crimes in ways that became increasingly difficult to ignore. The man who had appeared untouchable was now facing questions about actions that had remained secret for years. For many people who knew him, the revelation was almost impossible to process. They remembered the officer, the colleague, the person who seemed calm and controlled. They struggled to connect that image with the crimes being investigated. This reaction was common throughout the case. The biggest shock was not only the nature of the crimes, it was the identity of the person behind them. Russell Williams had spent years earning trust. His career was built on responsibility. He had been placed in situations where others depended on his judgment. And yet, Investigators were now examining evidence that showed a completely different side of his life. The investigation revealed that the crimes had followed a progression. They began with secret burglaries. They involved careful planning. They involved violations of people's privacy. But eventually, the behavior escalated into something much more serious. The investigation was no longer about a series of break-ins. It was about a man suspected of far more dangerous actions. As investigators collected evidence, they began reconstructing the timeline of Williams' behavior. They examined records. They reviewed information connected to the crimes. They studied patterns. They looked at how the incidents happened and how they connected. Each piece added another layer to the story. The process showed that the crimes were not isolated mistakes. They were connected by a consistent approach. A person who understood how to operate without attracting attention. A person who carefully separated his public life from his hidden actions. That separation was one of the most disturbing elements of the case. Williams was able to continue his professional life while concealing behavior that was completely opposite to the values associated with his position. He attended military functions. He interacted with colleagues. He carried the authority of his rank. At the same time, investigators were uncovering evidence of a secret life. The contrast created a sense of disbelief. Many people asked how someone could maintain such a convincing appearance for so long. But criminal cases often reveal that people are more complicated than they seem. A person's achievements do not automatically reveal their character. A respected position does not guarantee honesty. A familiar face does not always reveal the truth. The investigation into Williams became a powerful example of that reality. As authorities continued gathering evidence, the pressure surrounding the case increased. The public wanted answers. The victims wanted justice. Investigators wanted to understand not only what happened, but how long it had been happening. Every new discovery added to the growing picture. The careful planning behind the crimes became clear. The level of control involved became clear. The investigation showed a person who had not simply lost control for a moment. Instead, the evidence suggested repeated choices, repeated decisions, repeated actions over time. That distinction mattered because it changed the way people understood the case. It was not about a single incident. It was about a pattern that had existed quietly while Williams continued living a normal public life. As the case moved toward its next stage, investigators faced the challenge of confronting someone who appeared completely different from the person described by the evidence. This was one of the most unusual aspects of the investigation. They were not dealing with a person who openly appeared dangerous. They were dealing with someone who had successfully created the impression of normality. The investigation forced people to reconsider how they judge others. It showed that danger is not always obvious. Sometimes it exists behind success, behind respect, behind a carefully maintained reputation. When Williams was finally confronted with the evidence against him, the carefully constructed image began to collapse. The person who had spent years controlling what others saw was now facing a situation where the truth could no longer be hidden. The investigation had reached the point where the questions were no longer unanswered. The evidence had created a clear picture. A respected military officer was now at the center of a criminal case that shocked the nation. The story of Russell Williams became more than an investigation. It became a study of deception, a study of how someone can maintain two completely different identities. One visible, one hidden. The visible identity was the colonel, the officer, the leader. The hidden identity was the person investigators were now exposing, the person responsible for crimes that affected many lives. For the victims, this moment represented the beginning of accountability. For investigators, it represented the result of months of work. For the public, it represented a disturbing realization. Sometimes the person people trust the most can be the person they understand the least. The investigation into Russell Williams would continue toward the courtroom, where the evidence would be presented and the full story would become public. But before justice could be reached, the world had to understand one thing. The man behind the uniform was not the person everyone thought he was. For months, the investigation into Russell Williams had been building quietly. Behind the scenes, investigators were collecting information, reviewing evidence, and trying to understand the person behind a series of disturbing crimes. What began as an investigation into burglaries had transformed into something much larger. The questions became more serious. The stakes became higher. And eventually, investigators reached the moment that changed everything. The moment when suspicion became undeniable. The breakthrough did not come from one single piece of evidence. It came from the accumulation of details. A pattern, a connection, a series of facts that together revealed a much darker reality. For investigators, this was the point where the carefully hidden life of Russell Williams began to collapse. The man who had spent years maintaining control over his public image could no longer separate that image from the truth. The investigation had revealed that the crimes were connected. They were not random. They were not isolated events. They reflected a repeated pattern of behavior that had existed beneath the surface for years. As the evidence became stronger, authorities began to understand the scale of what they were dealing with. Russell Williams was not simply someone accused of a few criminal acts. He was a person whose actions had escalated over time. The early burglaries were part of a larger story. They showed the beginning of a disturbing progression. A person crossing boundaries. A person entering the private spaces of others. A person becoming increasingly involved in secret behavior. The investigation showed how important small details can become. A single clue may not reveal the truth, but when combined with other information, it can change everything. Investigators often describe cases like this as putting together a puzzle. At first, the pieces appear unrelated, but eventually, the image becomes clear. That was what happened with Russell Williams. The pieces connected. The hidden pattern became visible, and the person behind the crimes was no longer unknown. One of the most shocking elements of the case was how far the public image was from reality. Williams had built a reputation as a disciplined military officer. He represented authority. He represented leadership. He represented trust. But the investigation revealed that behind this image was someone who had been hiding deeply troubling behavior. This contrast became the central focus of the case. People were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. A person can appear successful and respectable while hiding actions that are completely different from the image they present. When investigators finally confronted Williams, the situation moved into a new phase. The careful control he had maintained for years began to disappear. The investigation no longer depended only on discovering what happened. It depended on revealing the full extent of his actions. The evidence created a timeline. It showed how the crimes developed. It showed how one behavior connected to another. It showed that the actions were not the result of a single moment. They were choices made repeatedly over time. This was a critical part of understanding the case. Because the question was not only what Russell Williams had done, the question was why. What allowed someone to maintain two completely different identities? How could someone continue living a normal public life while hiding such disturbing actions? These questions would remain part of the discussion surrounding the case for years. The investigation also changed how many people viewed the concept of trust. Before the truth was revealed, Williams was someone many people believed they understood. He had a career. He had responsibilities. He had a reputation. But the evidence showed that appearances can sometimes hide reality. The breakthrough in the case was not only about identifying a suspect. It was about exposing the truth behind a carefully created image. The public saw the collapse of a reputation that had taken decades to build. The uniform that once represented achievement now became connected to a story of betrayal and deception. For many Canadians, the case was difficult to understand because it challenged their assumptions. They wanted criminals to look like criminals. They wanted warning signs to be obvious. But the reality was more complicated. Sometimes the person responsible is someone who appears completely ordinary, someone who blends into everyday life, someone who has earned the trust of others. The investigation into Williams became a reminder that criminal behavior can exist behind carefully constructed appearances. As the evidence continued to emerge, the legal process began moving forward. The case was preparing to enter the courtroom. The facts gathered by investigators would soon be presented publicly. The victims would finally have a chance to see justice pursued, and the country would learn the full extent of what had happened. But before that stage, the breakthrough itself represented a major turning point. The mystery was over. The unknown offender had a name. The hidden crimes had a connection. The questions that had remained unanswered for so long were finally beginning to receive answers. The story of Russell Williams was no longer about a series of unexplained incidents. It was about a man who had lived behind a carefully created mask, a man who appeared to represent discipline but secretly violated the safety of others, a man whose public success could not hide the truth forever. The investigation had reached the moment where the hidden life was exposed. The world could finally see what had been concealed for years. And now, the next chapter would not be about discovery. It would be about accountability. The moment Russell Williams entered the courtroom, the image that had defined his entire adult life began to disappear. For years, he had been known as a military officer, a commander, a person associated with discipline, leadership, and responsibility. But now, he was no longer standing before people as a respected officer. He was standing as a convicted criminal, facing the consequences of actions that had shocked an entire country. The courtroom became the place where the hidden story of Russell Williams was finally presented in full. The public learned details that were difficult to understand. The person many believed they knew was revealed to be someone very different. The investigation had uncovered years of secret behavior. The trial would now determine justice. For the victims and their families, the courtroom represented something more than a legal process. It represented acknowledgement, recognition that what happened to them mattered, that their fear, pain, and loss were real, that the person responsible would finally be held accountable. The case received enormous public attention because of the contrast between Williams' previous life and the crimes connected to him. Many people struggled to understand how someone with such a respected position could commit such serious offenses. The courtroom forced society to confront that uncomfortable question. How could a person who appeared responsible and successful hide such a disturbing reality? As the evidence was presented, the picture became clearer. The crimes were not explained as a single mistake. They were not presented as one moment of poor judgment. Instead, they revealed a pattern of behavior that developed over time, a pattern involving planning, a pattern involving secrecy, a pattern involving a deliberate choice to continue. This was one of the most important aspects of the case. The court was not examining only what happened. It was examining the decisions that led to those events. Every action, every choice, every attempt to hide the truth. Together, they created a picture of someone who had carefully separated his public identity from his private actions. The courtroom also revealed the devastating impact on the victims. Behind every piece of evidence were real people whose lives had been changed forever, people who had lost their sense of security, people who had experienced fear inside places that should have been safe, people who had to deal with the consequences of someone else's actions. True justice in cases like this is not only about punishing the offender. It is also about recognizing the suffering of those affected. The victims were not just names in a legal file. They were individuals with families, memories, and futures that were forever changed. As the case moved forward, the evidence against Williams became overwhelming. The careful image he had built throughout his career could no longer protect him. The reputation, the rank, the achievements, none of those things could erase the reality of what had happened. The military community was also deeply affected. For an organization built on trust and honor, discovering that one of its senior members had committed serious crimes created a painful moment of reflection. The uniform carried a meaning. It represented service, commitment, responsibility. But Williams' actions created a devastating contradiction. He had held a position that required trust, while secretly engaging in behavior that violated the trust of others. The case became a reminder that titles and positions do not define a person completely. A person can achieve success. A person can receive respect. A person can appear disciplined. But those things do not guarantee the absence of hidden behavior. The sentencing phase became the moment when the consequences were officially decided. Williams received a life sentence for the murders connected to the case, with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The punishment reflected the seriousness of the crimes and the devastating impact on the victims and their families. The courtroom had reached its conclusion, but for many people affected by the case, there was no true ending. A sentence could not bring back what was lost. It could not erase memories. It could not undo the pain. Justice could provide accountability, but it could not restore the lives that had been changed forever. For the families of the victims, the legal outcome represented an important step, but the emotional journey continued. They had to move forward carrying memories of people they loved and questions they would never completely answer. The case also left a lasting impact on Canadian society. It became one of the most widely discussed examples of a respected public figure committing serious crimes. It changed the way many people thought about trust and appearances. It reminded people that a person's public image may only reveal one part of who they are. The fall of Russell Williams was dramatic because his public identity had been so powerful. The world did not see a criminal hiding in obvious ways. The world saw a successful officer. That was what made the revelation so disturbing. The courtroom did not only expose crimes. It exposed the collapse of an illusion. The illusion that success always reflects character. The illusion that respect always means trustworthiness. The illusion that people are always exactly who they appear to be. The justice process answered the legal questions. It established responsibility. It delivered a sentence. But the deeper questions remained. How did the behavior continue for so long? Were there signs that were missed? Could anything have prevented the tragedy? These questions would continue to be discussed long after the trial ended, because the story of Russell Williams was not only about one criminal case. It was about human behavior, about deception, about the hidden parts of people that are sometimes impossible to see. In the end, the courtroom stripped away the identity that Williams had spent decades creating. The commander disappeared. The respected officer disappeared. What remained was the truth. A man whose secret actions destroyed the lives of others and ended his own life as he knew it. The case became a permanent reminder that justice may come after the truth is revealed, but the consequences of crime continue long after the courtroom doors close. After the courtroom proceedings ended, after the evidence had been presented and the sentence had been delivered, the name Russell Williams remained deeply connected to one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern Canadian history. The legal process had reached its conclusion. A verdict had been given. A punishment had been decided. But for many people, especially those whose lives were directly affected, the story did not simply end when the courtroom doors closed. Because the aftermath of a crime is often where the deepest consequences appear. The victims and their families were left to continue living with what had happened. Communities were left to process the shock. And society was left with difficult questions about trust, deception, and how someone could hide such disturbing behavior behind a respected public identity. The case of Russell Williams became memorable not only because of the crimes themselves, but because of the contradiction at the center of the story. A man who appeared to represent discipline and responsibility became associated with actions that represented the complete opposite. For years, Williams had built a successful military career. He had achieved a level of recognition that many people spend their entire lives working toward. He was trusted. He was respected. He was placed in positions where others depended on him. That image made the truth even more difficult for people to accept. Many people who followed the case struggled with the same question. How could someone who seemed so controlled and professional hide such a dark reality? The answer was not simple. The case showed that human beings can sometimes maintain completely different versions of themselves. A public identity and a private reality. The public saw the officer, the person who followed rules, the person who carried responsibility. But hidden away from that image was another side that investigators eventually uncovered. This contrast became one of the most important lessons from the case. It reminded people that appearances can be powerful. A person's achievements, career, and reputation can influence how others see them. But those things do not always reveal everything. The victims remained at the center of the aftermath. While the public discussed the mysteries surrounding Williams, the people directly affected had to deal with the consequences. For them, this was never only a famous criminal case. It was something personal. It was about fear, loss, pain, and the struggle to rebuild a sense of normal life after something that should never have happened. Crime often leaves invisible wounds. A person may recover physically. A house may be repaired. Evidence may be collected and stored. A trial may end. But the emotional impact can continue for years. The victims were forced to confront the reality that someone had entered their lives without permission and changed them forever. The case also affected the military community. The revelation that a senior officer had committed serious crimes created a moment of reflection. The military depends heavily on trust. Members rely on each other in situations where mistakes can have serious consequences. Leadership is built on the belief that those in positions of authority will act with integrity. Williams' actions damaged that trust. They created a painful contradiction between the values associated with military service and the behavior of one individual. However, the case also demonstrated an important truth. An organization is not defined by the actions of one person alone. The investigation, prosecution, and response showed the importance of accountability. When wrongdoing is discovered, the responsibility is to confront it, investigate it, and ensure justice is served. Beyond the immediate impact, the case became part of a larger discussion about criminal behavior. Experts examined how someone could maintain such a successful public life while hiding serious offenses. They looked at issues involving personality, secrecy, control, and escalation. The case raised questions about warning signs. Were there behaviors that could have revealed the truth earlier? Were there moments when someone might have noticed something unusual? These questions are common after major crimes. People naturally search for explanations. They want to understand how something so serious could happen without being recognized. But reality is often more complicated. People do not always reveal their true selves. Some individuals are capable of creating convincing appearances. They can interact normally. They can succeed professionally. They can gain the trust of others. And at the same time, they can hide behavior that is completely different from the image they present. The story of Russell Williams became a reminder of that uncomfortable reality. The case also changed how many people viewed the concept of a criminal. Many people imagine criminals as obvious. They imagine someone who looks dangerous or behaves in a way that immediately creates suspicion. But Williams challenged that assumption. He was someone who appeared ordinary in many ways. Someone who had built relationships. Someone who had achieved success. Someone who seemed unlikely to become the center of a criminal investigation. That was part of what made the case so disturbing. The danger was hidden behind familiarity. Years after the trial, the name Russell Williams continued to be remembered, not because of his achievements, not because of his military career, but because of the damage caused by the crimes and the questions they left behind. His story became an example of how carefully constructed identities can collapse when the truth is finally revealed. It became a reminder that trust must be earned through actions, not only through appearances. And most importantly, it became a reminder that behind every criminal case are real people whose lives are changed forever. The victims' experiences remain the most important part of the story. Their fear, their suffering, their courage in moving forward, Because true crime is not only about understanding the person who committed the crime, it is also about remembering those who were affected, those who had their lives interrupted, those who had to find a way to continue. The legacy of the Russell Williams case is therefore complicated. It is a story of deception and betrayal, a story of investigation and justice, a story about the danger of assuming we fully know someone simply because we know their public image. But above all, it is a story about the importance of remembering the human costs behind every crime. Because when the headlines disappear and the attention moves elsewhere, the consequences remain with the people whose lives were changed. And that is the final lesson of the Russell Williams case. The truth may take time to emerge, but once it does, it changes everything. The case of Russell Williams left behind more than a criminal record. It left behind questions. Questions about human behavior. Questions about deception. Questions about how someone could create such a convincing image of success while hiding actions that were deeply disturbing. After the investigation ended and the courtroom delivered its judgment, many people continued trying to understand the person behind the crimes. Not to excuse what happened, not to reduce responsibility, but to understand how such a contradiction could exist. How could someone with a respected career, a position of authority, and a reputation for discipline secretly live a completely different life? The answer lies in the complicated nature of human behavior. People are not always as simple as the roles they play. A person can be intelligent and successful. A person can appear calm and professional. A person can interact normally with others. And yet, behind that public image, there can be hidden thoughts, desires, or behaviors that nobody around them sees. Russell Williams' case became a disturbing example of this contrast. His professional identity was built around control. The military environment rewarded organization, planning, and discipline. Those same qualities appeared in the way investigators later described as criminal behavior. The crimes did not appear to be random moments of chaos. They showed preparation. They showed patience. They showed an ability to separate actions from consequences. This separation is one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. Many people assume that someone who commits serious crimes must constantly appear unstable or dangerous. But some individuals can function normally in society while hiding deeply troubling behavior. They can maintain relationships. They can perform their jobs. They can appear dependable. This does not mean the hidden behavior is impossible to detect, but it does show how difficult it can be to recognize what exists beneath the surface. The case also raised questions about identity. For years, Williams had a carefully built identity. He was a military officer. He was a leader. He was someone associated with responsibility. But identity is not only the image that others see. It is also the choices a person makes when nobody is watching. The investigation revealed that the public version of Williams and the private version were dramatically different. The distance between those two identities became one of the most shocking parts of the case. Experts who studied the case often focused on the idea of compartmentalization. This is the ability some people have to separate different parts of their lives. A person may create mental divisions between their public behavior and their private actions. They may convince themselves that one part of their life does not affect the other, but the consequences eventually connect everything. The hidden behavior affects real people. It affects victims. It affects families. It affects communities. The case demonstrated that secrecy does not erase responsibility. A person can hide actions for a long time, but hidden actions still have consequences. Another important aspect of the case was the issue of escalation. The crimes did not appear to remain at one level. The behavior developed over time. This is a pattern often examined in criminal investigations. Some offenders begin with actions they believe they can control. They test boundaries. They cross smaller lines. Over time, those boundaries can move. The behavior can become more serious. The investigation into Williams showed why early warning signs matter. A small violation may not seem connected to a future serious crime, but patterns often reveal themselves only when examined together. One of the most difficult questions surrounding the case was whether people close to Williams could have known. Could anyone have recognized something was wrong? Could someone have seen a sign? These questions are natural after a shocking crime. People want to believe there is always an obvious warning. They want to believe dangerous behavior is easy to identify. But reality is more complicated. Many people who commit serious crimes are able to hide behind ordinary interactions. They know how to present themselves. They know what others expect to see. They understand social behavior. That ability to maintain appearances can make discovery extremely difficult. The Russell Williams case also became a lesson about authority and trust. Positions of power often create an assumption of character. People naturally connect success with reliability. They believe someone who has achieved a respected position must also be a good person. But a title does not define morality. A career does not reveal every part of someone's personality. A reputation can be carefully created. The case forced many people to separate the idea of achievement from the idea of integrity. True character is shown through choices, especially the choices made when there is no audience. The psychological questions surrounding the case remain part of its lasting impact. People continue to ask what allowed Williams to maintain his double life for so long. Was it ambition? Was it a desire for control? Was it the ability to hide unwanted parts of himself from others? The answers may never fully explain the person behind the crimes. Understanding behavior does not remove accountability. A person's background, personality, or psychology does not change the fact that choices were made. The victims experienced real harm. Their lives were affected by those choices. And that remains the central truth of the case. The story of Russell Williams is therefore not only a story about a criminal. It is a story about the complexity of human behavior, about the difference between appearance and reality, about how someone can be viewed one way by the world while hiding another side completely. It is a reminder that every person is responsible for their actions, regardless of their position, reputation, or success. Because in the end, the most important measure of a person is not the image they create. It is the impact of what they do. And in the case of Russell Williams, that impact left behind fear, pain, and unanswered questions that would continue long after the investigation ended. The case of Russell Williams did not disappear when the trial ended. The sentence was delivered. The legal process was complete. But the questions surrounding the case continued. For investigators, experts, and the public, the story became more than a criminal investigation. It became a lesson about hidden behavior, a lesson about the limits of appearances, a lesson about how difficult it can be to recognize danger when it exists behind a familiar face. The investigation revealed something deeply unsettling. The person responsible was not someone living outside society. He was not someone who immediately attracted suspicion. He was someone who had built a respected place within the community. That reality forced many people to rethink how they viewed crime. Before the case, many people believed they could recognize a dangerous person. They believed certain behaviors, appearances, or backgrounds would reveal someone's true nature. But Russell Williams challenged that belief. He showed that criminal behavior can exist behind confidence, success, and reputation. The investigation itself became a study in patience and attention to detail. At the beginning, investigators were not looking at a complete picture. They were looking at separate pieces, individual incidents, individual reports, individual moments of concern. The challenge was understanding that those pieces were connected. This is one of the most important parts of criminal investigation. A case is rarely solved by one dramatic discovery. More often, it is solved through the careful collection of many small details. A timeline, a pattern, a connection, a piece of evidence that only becomes meaningful when placed beside everything else. In the Williams investigation, those connections eventually revealed the truth. The crimes were not isolated. The behavior followed a pattern. The person responsible had been hiding behind a carefully maintained identity. The investigation also highlighted the importance of understanding offender behavior. Criminal cases are not only about evidence, they are also about understanding decisions. Why did someone choose a certain method? Why did someone continue? Why did someone believe they could avoid being discovered? These questions help investigators understand patterns and prevent future crimes. But understanding does not mean excusing. The responsibility remains with the person who made those choices. The case also created discussions about trust. Trust is a necessary part of society. People trust neighbors. They trust coworkers. They trust leaders. They trust people who appear responsible. Without trust, communities cannot function. But the Williams case showed that trust must always be connected to accountability. A person's position should not place them above questions. A person's achievements should not make them immune from investigation. The truth must always be based on evidence. This was especially significant because Williams held a position associated with authority. The military is built on values such as discipline, loyalty, and responsibility. When someone within that system commits serious crimes, the impact reaches beyond the individual. It affects the perception of the institution itself. However, the case also demonstrated that accountability is possible even when someone appears powerful. The investigation did not stop because of status. It did not stop because of reputation. The evidence became the deciding factor. Another major lesson from the case was the importance of listening to victims. In many criminal investigations, victims are the first people to recognize that something is wrong. Their experiences provide information that cannot be ignored. Behind every report, every piece of evidence, and every investigation file, there are real people. People who experienced fear. People who lost their sense of safety. People who had to live with the consequences of another person's actions. The case reminded society that victims should never become secondary to the story. Too often, attention focuses on the offender. People become fascinated by the person who committed the crime. They ask about their background, their personality, their motives. But the center of every case should remain the people who were harmed. Their experiences are the reason justice matters. The investigation also raised questions about prevention. Could something have been done earlier? Could warning signs have been recognized? Could the escalation have been stopped? These questions do not have simple answers. Human behavior is complex. Not every unusual action becomes a serious crime. Not every warning sign is obvious. But the case showed why awareness matters. It showed the importance of paying attention to patterns rather than isolated incidents. A single event may seem insignificant, but repeated behavior can reveal something much larger. The story of Russell Williams also changed how people viewed the concept of a criminal. It challenged the idea that criminals always look different from everyone else. It showed that someone can appear successful while hiding destructive behavior. This does not mean people should become suspicious of everyone around them. Instead, it means society must understand that appearances are incomplete. People are judged by their actions, not only by their image. Years later, the case remained a powerful example of how difficult it can be to understand what exists beneath the surface. The investigation uncovered a reality that many people never expected. A respected officer, a successful professional, a person with authority, was also someone responsible for devastating crimes. The contrast between those two realities became the reason the case remained so memorable. It was not only about what happened, it was about the discovery that the person behind the crimes had been hidden in plain sight. The lessons from the case continue to influence discussions about criminal behavior, investigation methods, and the importance of accountability. The story serves as a reminder that truth often requires patience. It requires evidence. It requires people willing to look beyond assumptions. Because sometimes the most difficult cases are not the ones where the offender is impossible to find. Sometimes the most difficult cases are the ones where the person responsible is someone nobody expected. When the truth about Russell Williams became public, the reaction across Canada was immediate and intense. People were not only shocked by the crimes themselves, they were shocked by the person connected to them. The name Russell Williams had once represented something very different. To many people, he represented achievement. He represented a successful military career. He represented someone who had reached a position of authority through years of work and dedication. But the investigation revealed a completely different reality. The contrast between the public image and the hidden truth became one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire case. For many Canadians, the story was difficult to process because it challenged a basic assumption people often make, that we can recognize who someone truly is. People believe that someone with a respected career, a professional reputation, and a position of leadership would naturally reflect those qualities in every part of life. But the case revealed that appearances can sometimes hide much more complicated realities. The public reaction was filled with disbelief. People who had followed Williams' career struggled to understand how someone they viewed as disciplined and reliable could be connected to such serious crimes. The image of the military officer created an even stronger sense of betrayal. A uniform carries meaning. It represents responsibility. It represents trust. It represents service. For many people, seeing someone associated with those values commit crimes created a feeling of disappointment and confusion. The case became a reminder that institutions are made up of individuals. A position does not automatically define a person's character. A title does not guarantee integrity. A reputation does not always reveal the complete truth. As more information became available, public attention focused on how Williams had managed to hide his actions for so long. People wanted to understand how someone could maintain a normal professional life while secretly committing crimes. They searched for explanations. They looked for signs. They questioned whether anything had been missed. This reaction is common after major criminal cases. When something shocking happens, people often look backward. They examine the past. They search for moments that might have revealed the truth earlier. They ask, was there something people should have noticed? Was there a warning that was ignored? Was there a moment when the situation could have changed? These questions are natural because people want to believe that serious crimes can always be prevented if the signs are clear enough. But reality is often much more complicated. Not every unusual behavior reveals future criminal actions. Not every hidden problem is visible to others. Some people are extremely skilled at maintaining appearances. They know how to behave in ways that match expectations. They know how to create trust. They know how to separate different parts of their lives. The Williams case became an example of that difficulty. The public also began discussing the relationship between success and morality. For years, Williams had achieved things that many people admired. He had reached a respected rank. He had built a career. He had earned recognition. But those achievements did not erase the harm caused by his actions. The case showed that success and character are not the same thing. A person can accomplish great things professionally and still make deeply harmful choices. A person can be admired publicly while causing suffering privately. This was one of the hardest lessons for many people to accept. The case also created a wider conversation about trust in communities. People naturally rely on their understanding of others. They trust coworkers. They trust neighbors. They trust leaders. But trust depends on the belief that people are honest about who they are. The revelation about Williams damaged that sense of certainty. It reminded people that sometimes the person who appears most familiar may still have hidden aspects of their life. However, the case did not mean that everyone should become suspicious of those around them. Instead, it highlighted the importance of evidence and accountability. Judging someone only by appearance can be misleading, but ignoring concerning behavior can also be dangerous. The balance between trust and awareness became part of the larger discussion. The public also focused on the victims and their families. As the details of the crimes became known, many people recognized that behind the headlines were real individuals. People whose lives had been affected. People who experienced fear and loss. people who had to deal with consequences they never deserved. The attention surrounding Williams could sometimes overshadow the suffering of those harmed. But the most important part of the story remained the impact on the victims. Their experiences represented the true cost of the crimes. The investigation and trial may have centered on Williams, but the aftermath belonged to those whose lives were changed. The case also became a subject of discussion among experts studying criminal behavior. They examined the idea of a person living with two identities, the public identity and the hidden identity. They looked at how some offenders are able to appear ordinary while concealing serious behavior. The case became another example of why understanding criminal behavior requires looking beyond stereotypes. Danger does not always appear obvious. A person does not always fit the image people expect. Sometimes the most surprising cases are the ones where the offender was someone people trusted. Years later, the public memory of Russell Williams remained connected to that sense of contradiction. The officer, the commander, the criminal, all of those descriptions referred to the same person, and that was what made the case so difficult to understand. It was not only a story about crime, it was a story about deception, about hidden choices, about the difference between what people see and what exists beneath the surface. The case left Canada with many questions. Questions about trust, questions about prevention, questions about how well we truly know the people around us. But perhaps the strongest lesson was this: a person's image can be carefully created, but the truth is ultimately revealed through actions. And in the end, it was not the uniform, the career, or the reputation that defined Russell Williams. It was the choices he made, and the consequences those choices left behind. Years after the investigation, the trial, and the sentencing, the case of Russell Williams continued to remain in public memory. Some criminal cases disappear from attention once the legal process ends. The headlines fade. The public moves on. The details become part of history. But some cases remain because they raise questions that are much bigger than the crimes themselves. The Russell Williams case became one of those cases. It was not only about what happened, it was about how it happened. It was about the person involved. It was about the difference between appearance and reality. It was about how someone could build a respected life while hiding actions that caused unimaginable harm. The story left behind a complicated legacy. For many people, the most disturbing part was not only the crimes. It was the realization that the person responsible had lived among others as someone they trusted. He had a career. He had status. He had a reputation. He had a place in society. And yet, behind that public image, investigators uncovered a completely different reality. That contradiction became the central lesson of the case. People often want the world to be simple. They want good people to look good. They want dangerous people to look dangerous. They want warning signs to be obvious. But reality is rarely that clear. Human beings are complicated. Some people are capable of presenting one version of themselves to the world while hiding another. The case of Russell Williams became a reminder that trust should not be based only on reputation. It should be based on behavior. Because a person's achievements can show what they have accomplished, they do not always show who they truly are. The aftermath of the case also highlighted the importance of remembering victims. In many famous criminal cases, public attention often focuses on the offender. People become interested in the investigation, the personality of the suspect, the details of the crime, the courtroom. But behind every case are people whose lives have been changed forever. The victims and their families experience consequences that continued long after the media attention disappeared. For them, the case was never just a story. It was a painful reality. It was fear. It was loss. It was the challenge of rebuilding a life after something traumatic. That is why the most important part of any true crime story is not the person who committed the crime. It is the people affected by it, their experiences, their strength, their ability to continue despite what happened. The case also changed how many people viewed the idea of criminal investigations. It showed that solving complex cases requires more than finding evidence. It requires understanding patterns. It requires patience. It requires investigators to look beyond what appears obvious. In the beginning, investigators often do not have the complete picture. They have fragments, small pieces, individual events. The challenge is recognizing when those pieces belong together. The Williams investigation demonstrated how important that process can be. The truth was not revealed because of one simple discovery. It was revealed because investigators continued searching, continued questioning, and continued connecting information until the hidden pattern became impossible to ignore. The case also became part of a larger conversation about people in positions of authority. Society often gives additional trust to those who hold respected roles. Military officers, leaders, professionals, people with responsibilities. But authority should never replace accountability. A position does not make someone incapable of wrongdoing. A title does not guarantee character. The case reminded people that everyone must ultimately be judged by their actions, not their appearance, not their reputation, not their achievements. The story of Russell Williams also demonstrated the importance of accountability within institutions. When someone with power or status commits crimes, the response cannot be based on protecting an image. The priority must always be the truth, the protection of victims, and the pursuit of justice. The case became a painful example of what happens when someone uses trust as a shield. But it also showed that eventually, hidden actions can come to light. No matter how carefully someone tries to separate their public life from their private behavior, consequences remain. The investigation exposed what had been hidden. The court established responsibility, and history remembered the impact. The psychological questions surrounding the case continued long afterward. People wonder how someone could maintain such a controlled image. How could someone appear so ordinary while hiding such disturbing behavior? There may never be one simple explanation. Human behavior is influenced by many factors: personality, choices, environment, individual decisions. But one truth remains clear. Understanding why a crime happens does not remove responsibility for the crime. Explanation is not the same as justification. The victim suffered because of choices made by another person. Those choices had consequences. The case also became a reminder about the importance of awareness. Not fear, not suspicion of everyone, but awareness. The understanding that people are more complex than the images they present. That trust should exist alongside responsibility. That communities are strongest when people are willing to recognize problems and seek answers. The name Russell Williams became permanently connected to a story of deception and betrayal. But the final meaning of the case is not only about one person. It is about the lessons left behind. Lessons about investigation. Lessons about accountability. Lessons about the importance of remembering victims. And lessons about the reality that sometimes the most shocking truths are hidden behind the most familiar faces. The case remains a reminder that the truth may be delayed, but it has a way of emerging. A reputation can be built over years. A public image can be carefully maintained, but actions reveal reality. And in the end, it was not the uniform, the achievements, or the reputation that defined Russell Williams. It was the impact of his choices. And that impact continues to be remembered as one of the most unsettling criminal stories in Canadian history. The story of Russell Williams did not end when the courtroom reached its decision. The sentence marked the conclusion of the legal process, but it did not erase the questions, the emotions, or the impact left behind. Some cases remain in public memory because of their unusual circumstances. Others remain because they reveal something deeply uncomfortable about human nature. The Russell Williams case became one of those rare cases that people continue to discuss because it challenged the way society understands trust, identity, and deception. It was a story about a person who appeared to represent discipline and responsibility, but was later exposed for actions that completely contradicted that image. That contradiction became the reason the case continued to attract attention. The public had to accept that the person they saw was only one part of the story. The respected officer, the successful commander, the person who seemed dependable. All of these images existed, but they existed alongside another reality that was hidden for years. The case became a powerful reminder that people are often judged by what they show to the world. Their career, their achievements, their reputation, their position. But those things do not always reveal what happens away from public attention. The aftermath of a case forced many people to think differently about the idea of knowing someone. How well can we truly know another person? How much of someone's life is visible? How much remains hidden? These questions do not have easy answers. Every person has private thoughts, private struggles, and private experiences. Most people live consistent lives where their public identity and private identity match. But cases like Williams show that sometimes a person can create a separation between those two worlds. A person can appear one way while behaving another way. That was one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. The investigation did not reveal someone who was completely isolated from society. It revealed someone who was part of society, someone who interacted with others, someone who had earned trust. The case also changed the way many people viewed the concept of authority. When someone holds a respected position, society often gives them an additional level of confidence. People assume that responsibility in one area of life reflects responsibility in all areas. But the case showed that professional success does not automatically equal personal integrity. A person can be skilled at their job. They can achieve recognition. They can appear organized and controlled. But character is revealed through choices, especially choices made when there is no pressure to perform for others. The story also highlighted the importance of looking at behavior rather than reputation. Reputation is created through what people see. Behavior reveals who someone truly is. The difference between the two became central to understanding the case. Williams had built a reputation over many years, but the investigation uncovered behaviors that existed outside that reputation. This contrast created a lasting sense of betrayal for many people who followed the case. They were not only reacting to the crimes, they were reacting to the collapse of an image they believed was real. The case also left an impact on discussions about criminal prevention. People wondered whether earlier signs could have been recognized. They wondered whether certain behaviors should have raised concerns. These questions are common after serious crimes. People naturally search for a point where things could have changed, a moment where someone could have intervened, a moment where the outcome could have been different. But these questions are often difficult because criminal behavior is rarely simple. There is usually no single explanation. There is no single moment that explains everything. Instead, there is often a combination of decisions, opportunities, and circumstances. The case also reinforced the importance of victims being remembered. In stories involving notorious offenders, public attention can sometimes become focused on the person who caused harm. People become interested in their background, their personality, their motivations. But the true center of the story should always remain the people affected, the victims, their families, the people whose lives changed because of another person's actions. The consequences of crime are not limited to the courtroom. A sentence may punish the offender, but it cannot restore what was lost. It cannot remove painful memories. It cannot return life to the way it was before. Justice is important because it provides accountability, but healing is a separate journey. For those affected, the aftermath continues long after the public moves on. The case also became an example of how investigations require persistence. At first, investigators rarely see the entire picture. They see pieces, small details, separate events. The challenge is understanding how those pieces connect. In complex cases, patience becomes one of the most important tools. The truth often appears slowly. It requires people willing to continue searching even when answers are unclear. The Williams investigation demonstrated that reality can exist beneath the surface for a long time, but hidden truths eventually become visible. The case also left behind a broader message about responsibility. No amount of success, status, or recognition can protect someone from the consequences of their choices. A person's position may influence how others see them, but it does not change the reality of their actions. The final legacy of the Russell Williams case is therefore not only the story of a crime. It is a story about the importance of looking deeper, about understanding that people can be complicated, about recognizing that appearances are not always complete, and about remembering that behind every criminal case are real lives affected by the choices of others. The case remains one of the most unsettling examples of how someone can build an image of trust while hiding a completely different reality. It serves as a reminder that the truth may remain hidden for a time, but it does not disappear. Eventually, actions reveal what words and appearances cannot, and when the truth finally emerges, it changes everything. When the story of Russell Williams is remembered today, it is easy for the public conversation to focus on the shocking details of the crimes, the investigation, and the downfall of a once respected figure. But the true ending of this story is not about the offender. It is about the people whose lives were affected. It is about the victims. It is about the families who carried the pain long after the headlines disappeared. It is about the communities that had to process the reality that someone they viewed as ordinary had been hiding a disturbing secret. The final chapter of any crime story is not written when the suspect is identified. It is not written when the courtroom closes. It is written in the years that follow. The years when people continue living with what happened. The years when memories remain. The years when families continue finding ways to move forward. The case of Russell Williams became one of those stories that stayed in public memory because it represented more than a criminal investigation. It represented a difficult question about human nature. How can someone appear to be one thing while secretly becoming something completely different? How can someone build a life based on trust while making choices that destroy that trust? These questions continue to surround the case because the contrast was so extreme. The public image was carefully built, the reality was carefully hidden, and the discovery of the truth changed everything. Before the crimes became known, Williams was viewed through the lens of his achievements. People saw his career, they saw his position, they saw the success he had created. But after the investigation, those achievements became impossible to separate from the actions that followed. The case demonstrated that reputation is fragile. A person can spend years building an image, but a series of choices can completely redefine how history remembers them. The story also became a reminder that victims should never disappear behind the name of the person responsible. In many famous cases, the offender becomes the focus. The media examines their background. The public debates their personality. People search for explanations. But the most important part of any crime is the human cost. The victims were real people. They had hopes, dreams, families, plans for the future. Their lives were not defined by what happened to them. They were individuals whose stories mattered before the crimes ever occurred. Remembering them is an important part of understanding the case, because behind every investigation file, every courtroom argument, and every news report, there are human beings. People who experienced fear, people who experienced loss, people who had to face something they never should have faced. The aftermath also showed the importance of accountability. Justice cannot undo the past. It cannot bring back what was lost. It cannot remove every painful memory. But justice serves an important purpose. It recognizes responsibility. It confirms that actions have consequences. It gives victims and families the acknowledgement that their suffering was seen and taken seriously. The case also left behind lessons about trust. Trust is essential in everyday life. People trust those around them because society depends on cooperation. People trust coworkers. They trust neighbors. They trust leaders. But trust must always exist alongside awareness. The story of Russell Williams showed that a person's public identity may not reveal every part of who they are. This does not mean people should live in constant suspicion. It means society must understand that appearances are not always complete. A person's true character is revealed through consistent actions, through choices, through how they treat others when there is nothing to gain. The investigation also showed the importance of persistence. Many criminal cases are not solved because of one dramatic moment. They are solved through determination, through careful examination, through connecting details that initially seem unrelated. The truth often appears slowly, but patience and evidence can eventually reveal what was hidden. The case became an example of how investigators must look beyond assumptions. A person's status cannot determine guilt or innocence. A person's reputation cannot replace evidence. Facts must always guide the search for truth. Years later, the name Russell Williams remains associated with one of the most unsettling criminal cases in Canada. But the lasting message of the case is not only about the offender. It is about the warning signs of hidden behavior. It is about the importance of protecting victims. It is about recognizing that every action has consequences. The story also reminds society that people are more complex than the images they present. A person can appear successful. A person can appear trustworthy. A person can appear responsible. But those qualities must be supported by actions. Because in the end, a person is not defined only by what others believe about them. They are defined by what they choose to do. The legacy of a case is therefore a painful one. It is a story of deception, a story of betrayal, a story of investigation and justice. But above all, it is a story about the lasting impact of choices. The people affected by the crimes continue to represent the most important part of the story. Their experiences remind us that behind every headline are real lives. Behind every investigation are real emotions. Behind every case are people who deserve to be remembered. And that is the final lesson of the Russell Williams case. The truth can remain hidden for a while, but it cannot remain hidden forever. Images can be created. Reputations can be built. Secrets can be protected. But eventually, actions reveal reality. And when the truth finally comes to light, the most important thing left behind is not the story of the person who caused harm. It is the memory of those who endured it, the lessons learned from it, and the commitment to never forget the human lives behind the case. Even after the investigation ended, even after the courtroom delivered its final decision, the story of Russell Williams continued to remain in the minds of many people. Some cases become historical records. Others become lessons. This case became both. It was remembered not only because of the seriousness of the crimes, but because it forced people to examine difficult questions about trust, identity, and the hidden parts of human behavior. The most unsettling aspect of the case was not simply that a crime occurred. Crime exists throughout history. What made this case different was the person behind it. The contrast between the public image and the private reality created a sense of disbelief that lasted for years. A person who appeared disciplined, a person who appeared responsible, a person who had achieved a position that required confidence from others. And yet, behind that image, there was another reality that few people could have imagined. That contradiction became the lasting symbol of the case. The story showed that people are often more complicated than the roles they play. A uniform can represent responsibility. A career can represent achievement. A reputation can represent trust. But none of those things alone reveal everything about a person. The choices someone makes when they are not being watched often reveal far more than the image they present to the world. This was one of the most difficult lessons connected to the case. Many people want to believe that they can recognize danger. They want to believe that someone who is capable of serious harm will look different. They expect certain behaviors, certain personalities, certain warning signs. But reality is not always that simple. Some individuals can maintain ordinary lives while hiding deeply disturbing actions. They can communicate normally. They can succeed professionally. They can appear calm and controlled. That does not mean hidden behavior is impossible to discover. It means understanding people requires looking beyond appearances. The case also demonstrated the importance of personal responsibility. Throughout history, people have searched for explanations behind criminal actions. They look at backgrounds. They look at experiences. They look at psychological factors. They try to understand what leads someone to make harmful choices. These questions are important. Understanding behavior can help society prevent future harm. But understanding is not the same as excusing. At the center of every crime is a decision, a choice made by an individual, a responsibility that cannot be transferred. The case of Russell Williams became a reminder that no amount of success, intelligence, or social status removes accountability. A person's position may influence how others view them, but it does not change the consequences of their actions. Another lasting part of the case was the discussion about missed opportunities. After major crimes are uncovered, people often look back. They search for moments that could have changed the outcome. They ask whether something should have been noticed earlier, whether a sign was ignored, whether a different action could have prevented tragedy. These questions come from a natural desire to find control in situations that feel impossible to understand. People want to believe there's always a clear answer, a clear warning, a clear moment where everything could have changed. But human behavior is complex. Not every unusual action reveals future danger. Not every secret is visible. Sometimes the truth only becomes clear after many pieces are connected. That is why investigations are so important. They transform uncertainty into understanding. They take scattered information and create a complete picture. The Williams case also highlighted the importance of protecting the dignity of victims. The person who commits a crime often receives the most attention. Their background becomes the subject of discussion. Their personality becomes analyzed. Their actions become examined in detail. But the victims are the reason justice exists. They are the people whose lives were changed. They are the people whose experiences should remain at the center of the story. A criminal case is not only about discovering what happened, it is about recognizing who was affected. It is about remembering the human consequences behind the evidence. The case also left a lasting message about institutions and trust. Organizations often depend on the belief that people in important positions will act responsibly. When someone with authority commits serious wrongdoing, it creates a painful sense of betrayal, but it also demonstrates the importance of accountability. Institutions must be willing to confront uncomfortable truths. Protecting an image should never become more important than protecting people. The truth must always come first. Years later, the name Russell Williams continues to represent a warning about the limits of appearances. It reminds people that knowing someone's public identity does not always mean knowing their private reality. A person can have achievements. A person can receive respect. A person can appear successful. But character is revealed through behavior, through consistency, through choices. The case remains memorable because it forced society to confront an uncomfortable reality. Sometimes the people we least expect can become the source of the greatest shock. Not because they are impossible to understand, but because they are human beings capable of creating complicated versions of themselves. The final meaning of the case is not found only in the crimes. It is found in the lessons left behind. Lessons about investigation. Lessons about responsibility. Lessons about remembering victims. Lessons about looking deeper than appearances. The story of Russell Williams became more than a criminal case. It became a reflection on how people understand one another, how trust is created, how trust can be broken, and how truth, no matter how carefully hidden, eventually has a way of emerging. The world remembers the case because it was shocking, but it should also remember it because of what it teaches. That every person affected by crime matters. That every victim deserves to be remembered. That every action carries consequences. And that behind every public image, there is a human story that can only truly be understood through the choices a person makes.